Well, then, let's just jump right in. Floyd, welcome to Kicking Tables, here to tell us all about Koi Garden that hits Kickstarter on April 9th. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us all about Koi Garden? Tell us what the game's about and how it kind of plays.
Thanks. I'm super excited to be here in the show, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Well,
me.
we're so
And
happy to have you here.
yeah, and my game is literally all about relaxation, honestly. I'm a major chess player myself,
Okay.
and a lot of my past games have involved a lot of hectic stuff, which is like zombies and Kraken. So if you look up my name on like Board Game Geek,
Yes,
it's all like horror or
I noticed
action.
that. Yep. I,
And I really wanted to make a game that was more about inner peace.
okay.
As you know, 2020 was a little bit chaotic for everybody.
Just a little. I mean,
Tiniest little bit.
Just a little bit. So some for some of us worse than others.
yeah, for sure.
But I really like gardening, and I know a lot of things that I noticed was when you build a good garden, you start attracting animals in there. That's how you know you're a good gardener. Is if you start seeing like lizards or snails. And as a game designer, naturally I would think about how can I make a game out of this.
Okay.
And so that's what my game about. It's basically it's about a garden. A lot of people do not just regular gardening, but they do like water gardens
Hmm.
called
Yeah.
koi gardens,
Yeah.
and they fill it up with koi and they add all sorts of plants. It's really cool. And then they start to introduce wildlife like frogs and whatnot. And I thought it would be really cool to have a tile laying game with all sorts of puzzle elements that harmoniously fit with other players.
Okay.
So the original version of this was actually really chaotic,
Oh.
uh, which is it started out in the middle, and then players would put in their tiles, and they cohesively shared one pawn. Um,
Okay.
but what I did notice was that was actually really cool. But what I did notice was that I wanted the theme to fit more of like the actual peaceful element, which was building up your own garden,
Okay.
having control and kind of slowing down the pace.
Okay.
And I thought that went really well on the development side. And so a lot of my game is about introducing wildlife and how different wildlife score on the field. So you're building up your pond, you're making it larger, but you're also trying to optimize different kinds of layouts and the different kinds of wildlife that move within your pond. So,
Right.
and a lot of my games are really simple to play, but has a lot of deep thinking. If you and I know you two have already played it, yeah.
We
Yeah,
have, yes,
yeah.
and definitely there is a massive amount of strategy. When Tico and I were
Right.
playing, we would take minutes to figure out which tile to take, because not only do you have to choose which tile, you have to decide which, because that affects which animal you have to take for your next turn. So
Yeah.
it's all about that strategy, which was fantastic.
Right. And I think the second playthrough and the third playthrough is even better because the first playthrough, uh, it feels like an easy game. And then the second or third, you realize that, oh, this game doesn't really have a long setup time.
No, it doesn't.
And I can play it really quick and teach it really quick, but I can think better on my next game, second or third game
Oh yeah, for
as
sure.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it sets up really fast just so long as one of those snails doesn't make a run for it like it did with us.
Yeah, we found a snail on the floor.
Yeah, that's the one thing I think that's really cool about it too is the different wildlife is have different strategies, and you're really trying to wrap your head around how you can basically intertwine everything
Yeah,
together
that's right.
to kind
Yeah.
of make all this scoring, whether you're gonna make more wildlife come to life, or whether you're just trying to build one long path for one wildlife.
Right. And keep
So-
taking that wildlife back in. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned chess as an inspiration for you, and it really does feel that with, having to think, moves and moves ahead of what you're going to do. How much of that was, part of your thought process when you were building the game?
I'd say maybe a lot of my games are inspired by chess. This is probably going to be the last one. I'm going to be working on territory control games from now.
So you're moving on to checkers then.
That's a good way to put it. But I like war games. Really, like anything that has to do with battle and war.
You would never know it, with this game.
So like Koi Garden is definitely a tranquil, peaceful game. But a lot of my deepest thoughts come from like war and chess and stuff. It's not in this game, of course, because you have wildlife trying to harmoniously score points.
That's right.
In the field, and I think we captured that element pretty well.
Yeah,
a lot of the developers actually I should call them playtesters, helped me kind of get some of the ideas that are around. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that I have are not like completely unique. There's tons of tile laying card games, and there's also elements like switching out your wildlife when you pick certain drafts.
Right.
From like I would say games like Onitama is like the most commonly thought of. But I think what makes it unique is just all the rules put together. Especially when you introduce like different wildlife, basically how it's set up. Some would say it's really unique gameplay and unique art style together.
Yeah. You actually brought up a point earlier that when you first started creating the game, it was one pond instead of individual ponds, and everybody was contributing to the one big pond. I want to revisit that because I actually wrote down a question about that. Why is it separate ponds instead of one big one? And I understand you're trying to make that sort of each person has their own Zen garden. It is a relaxing game, but you're still competing against each other for points. So what was the big, maybe it wasn't a problem, but maybe it just wasn't your vision, but what was it about the one big garden that you didn't like?
So the one thing I really wanted to capture in this game was more about player progression. Basically, how you progress as a player. And a lot of it is about building your own pond and trying to basically, every time you build a pond, there's a new puzzle, which makes it really cool. And I think that the one pond doesn't really solve that. So the one pond, the map is always changing.
Right.
And so you're constantly trying to wrestle with other players, and it didn't feel comfortable for players, I would say.
Okay.
So the cool part was having my own pond. Nobody messes with it, and growing that pond and making it bigger to the point where when you end the game, you're like, oh, I want to play that again and see if I can build a better pond, or I don't want to get rid of my pond. I want to keep playing. But obviously the game ends at the 7th or 8th round, depending on the player count. But I think that was the element that we wanted to capture, and I think we caught that pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, so not only are you competing against your opponent for the most points, but you really wanted to be about optimizing your own pawn and giving you the challenge of making the best optimized pawn to get the most points. Because that's really what it comes down to, is you gain points based on how far the animal or the creature can move every turn.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
So you wanted to give a challenge to each player individually, as opposed to, Tico putting down a tile that completely messes up my thought process for the next turn.
Yeah.
Right.
It takes away the take that component
of
the game, and again builds up more of a Zen quality, I think, when you're not just trying to screw over your opponent. You're just really working on your
And
own zone.
and we noticed that while we were playing it, is like we were concentrating on what we were doing. I wasn't concerned with what Tika was doing, right? And vice versa. It was more like, here's what I want to do on my next turn to maximize the points. And here's what I loved about it, Floyd, is that we actually helped each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We weren't
Yeah.
necessarily while
Yeah.
we were trying to get the most points. We were like, well, if you put that there, then your creature can do this, right? We were actually helping each other.
Yeah, we were pointing out
Yeah.
spots. It's like, well, actually, if you go that way, if you just turn it this way, then you can score an extra like 6 points. And
Right. Right.
helping each other plan out, like basically like two neighbors, working on pawns together. It was a really unique experience because usually we go for the jugular when we play each other.
Well, you do.
Well, I do, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool element that I really wanted to go for, which was you can play it with versatility, right? If you have
Yeah.
really competitive players, you could really try to mess with each other. But
Yeah.
if you don't have competitive players, you could really try to help each other, and it's still a challenge for the
Yeah.
both of you. But
It
I
becomes
think,
more of a puzzle. It becomes
yeah,
it's
Yeah.
naturally just a puzzle now, right? As opposed to
exactly.
trying to deliberately mess up your opponent.
Right, exactly. And I think that puzzle element is something that I notice a lot of players love, a lot of board gamers love.
Hmm.
Every convention that I've went to has a puzzle room with just jigsaw puzzles. So
Yeah.
I think those kinds of players will also enjoy this game. And if you're competitive, I would say the switching wildlife, that part comes very important, because if I saw another player was taking this certain type of wildlife that helps me score my field,
Hmm.
you could really alpha game it and say, okay, I want to get this. I want to try to block this player. It's
Yeah.
still possible, even though
Sure.
you have separate pawns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, for
you
sure.
can still block by making that move.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to know actually from you, it is a very thinky game. What are some of your favorite strategies that you use to maximize points when you're building?
So one of the things that I do as I'm a really competitive player.
Yeah.
So depending on who's playing, if it's a bunch of strangers, I will be super competitive. But if it's a bunch of my friends and developers, then probably not so much.
Yeah.
So I want to say
But I,
you're a very competitive war gamer who just made a very non-competitive Zen game.
yeah, exactly. That originally started as a design of a very competitive wildlife war game.
Yeah.
But now it's very zen, right?
Yes, it really is.
And so and I think the art too is zen. But I think my favorite strategy is really thinking about how players make their pawn, and trying to capitalize on the turn structure, on whether they're going to get this next and last, to see when I could take their wildlife before they can score the maximum amount of points. It kind of forces them to change their pawn if you screw them up in a certain, if you take a certain wildlife on like turn 3 or 4 when they needed it, they kind
Okay.
of change directions, and they start putting out different wildlife. And as you know, if you played the game, when you put out more wildlife, it starts messing you up even more, because you
Yes.
have obstacles
Yeah.
in the way.
Yeah.
And if you haven't, if for those listeners who hasn't played this game, the more wildlife you put out there, the more obstacles there is, because two wildlife can't share one space, so they really start blocking and congesting.
Oh yeah, that's a good
Um,
point. So
Yeah.
forcing more wildlife onto your
right.
opponent gives them more blockers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you also have to be very careful, because sometimes, depending on the wildlife that's shown out there, so you draft the 4 random wildlife each game, but depending on those 4 wildlife, those could potentially score more if you put out more wildlife
Right.
than just less.
Right.
So it really depends on how other players build their pawn, and and how they're using the wildlife.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just can't see it. They just can't see that move.
So tell us about the development process. What kind of things did you have difficulties with as you're developing? What was the hardest thing to actually hammer out and get right?
So I think the thing that took the longest, and the development process was actually the fastest part in this project. But I think the hardest part to kink out was balancing the difficulty of turn structure versus how long it takes to make a move.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
Which was, I wanted it to be less than 90 seconds. Otherwise, other players will be like, hey, why are you taking so long? Or
Yeah.
if you ever played this game, it's really weird because the turn structure is really fast, but it feels just right. Like you're putting enough thinking into it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like you're thinking for like an hour to
Right.
make your move.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Awesome.
And like to balance that really was, I think, complicated because I really had to think, okay, how much choices do they have? How much, like sections I could really have gone with an hex, if I wanted to, but that would make that option wider. And so the whole design structure was based on short decisions rather than longer, thinking more, more like
drag
decisions.
it out too long.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So tell us a bit about your campaign. Do you have any stretch goals attached to your campaign or any expansions possibly planned?
I do. So each of my projects, I don't expect anything. I don't expect to be a $1 million campaign or whatnot. But I make sure that there's enough there. I don't really know how I'm going to do, but I make sure there's enough there for people to kind of guide through.
Right.
Okay.
So if I just put, I think up to 100,000 there, I'm not even sure if I'm going to do that, but it is going to be an exclusive Kickstarter only, and it's only going to be $19 for the base game.
Wow.
So
Great
like
price.
That's great.
it's an exclusive $19 with I think decent shipping. It's like $7 or something. I think it's if I was a consumer, I would definitely.
Oh yeah,
like,
that's
hey,
a great price.
Yeah.
For what
It's
you're
a
getting in this
$19.
game, it's great.
Yeah, and it's something that so all my games are games that have low setup, and it's something that you want to play on the table right away. Like I never have any games that I make that has long setups. Well, for now, because I think I'm gonna move on to that now.
Checkers will take longer for sure.
Yeah.
Checkers will take longer for sure. And I always have like a clean, elegant design. That's what I really go for. Something that you'll get out on the table like 2 or 3 times at least. I know some games don't even make it out of the saran wrap, but all my games you're definitely gonna at least put it on the table once, with just how easy it is to teach, how easy it is to set up. But with enough complexity in it, it's a game that you would potentially want to continue playing. Yeah.
So, all right, we got a new little segment that we're doing. We want you to sort of join us for. We have a lightning round, board game related lightning round question, just to get to know you a little bit better.
Oh, cool.
You cool with doing that? It's just what was it? How many questions is this, Sean? 10?
Eight questions. And
Eight.
just the
Eight.
the first answer that comes to mind,
man.
just say it. Really, it's going to be really
All
fast.
Oh,
All right. Worker
All
placement or area control?
area control.
Area control. All right. Dice or cards?
It's a good one. Cards for
Cards.
sure.
All right. What is the first game that you ever played?
Oh, that's a good one. I want to say it's Clue.
Nice.
Yeah, I want to say
Good
it's
choice.
Clue.
Nice.
Good.
One of my
That's
all-time
a great
favorites.
It's not
All right.
Monopoly for sure.
Competitive
Oh
or
no,
co-op?
you know what it was? It was Fireball Island.
Oh,
that's a good
Yeah,
one too.
the
Okay.
old one, the Milton Bradley one.
nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
that must be the first one. Yeah,
All right. Competitive or cooperative?
competitive for sure.
All right. When purchasing games, local game store or online?
Local. Yeah,
Nice.
it has
Yeah.
to be. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Legacy games, destroy components or preserve them?
That's a good question. I would say destroy would, because it's just it's more unique.
Yeah. I destroy. I
Um,
do the same.
Yeah, we
yeah,
did both actually. We ripped them up and then saved the pieces.
but I do like the Unlock series. I will say that.
Yeah.
Because I could just buy it and give it to a gift to one of my,
Yeah,
Yes.
you can just
do it.
repackage those. Those
For
are fun.
sure.
All right, Marvel or DC?
Oh, that's a tough. Batman is my favorite character, but I would, overall, I would have to say Marvel has more cast. That's
All right.
yeah. So more Marvel, I guess.
That's
Except
fair.
Batman. Batman's like
So
the number
Marvel with
one.
Batman brought in there somehow. Multiverse
Yeah.
Batman in there. All right, and your favorite game mechanic?
I would say bluffing. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
bluffing's a good. Yeah, bluffing's a good mechanic.
Sean calls
Even
that
though
lying, but we'll call it bluffing. I like bluffing.
Oh.
I had a one of my game design sessions that this was back when there was we were having conflicts with North Korea, and I made a game called New Missile Bluff or something.
Okay.
And it was a very simple, how much nukes do you have versus. I
Nice.
brought it to a prototype and people were just dying laughing. It was like, oh, how many nukes do you have versus, you're just bluffing to see how much nukes you have
Yeah.
so that your country can capitalize better.
And Tico, it's only lying when you're supposed to tell the truth and you don't. So,
I think it's still bluffing.
Yeah,
All right.
I think you can't go wrong if you design a bluffing game.
Yeah,
It's
for
just
sure.
all fun and kicks.
Well, I mean, that's what things like Werewolf is all about, right? It's all about bluffing.
Yeah.
All right, Floyd, just before we let you go, give us the elevator pitch. Why should we back your game?
So you should back it because if you look at the box, it's going to look beautiful anywhere. You literally don't have to play it. You can just put it like next to your pot, next to your whatever you're growing, next to your bed. I won't judge.
In your garden.
You can put it in your garden, and it's going to look beautiful. But seriously, it's a really fun game that you can just throw out and play with your friends at any time. And a lot of games have complex setups, so you won't even get it on the table. My game is like $19 exclusive, and you'll have the same amount of fun as you would with a like $40 game that takes maybe like an hour to set up and learn.
Yeah, for sure. And we can attest to that. We've played it. You can look for our review coming soon. We'll put a link right up there to that. Floyd, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you and learning a bit more about Koi Garden.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Tycho. Thank you, everybody, for watching this video. Check out the game on Kickstarter, which is going live on April 9th. Just search for Koi Garden or check out the Facebook and subscribe to this channel, OMG Nexus, and the link's right below.